Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for Death for Dividends, financing the dual crisis of militarism and extractive industries. Um, uh, just a heads up, we'll be doing some satire here, and also be aware that there will be a trigger warning for some graphic images and video. Additionally, want to let you all know that, yeah, we're here as a coalition, the Earth Day to Tax Day Coalition, which is composed of ICHIRP Pacific Northwest, the Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, ILPS, or the International League for People's Struggle in Portland, IMA, the International Migrants Alliance, Sunrise Movement, Beaverton, and then Anak Bayan Portland, Extinction Rebellion, and Code Pink. So yeah, that's currently the Earth Day to Tax Day Coalition. And if you are interested in joining this coalition, it is from April 22nd, which was Earth Day, and then Tax Day, which is now going to be July 15th. So within that period, we'll be doing multiple actions and webinars. And you'll notice that we'll be doing a webinar every 2 weeks. So our next webinar will actually be on June 6th, which is on murder and pollution for all. And there'll be more prop for that coming out shortly. So yeah, if you're interested in joining the coalition, please let us know. And also, if you have questions during this webinar, please type them out in the chat box. We did restrict it so only the hosts and co-hosts are able to speak during this webinar. So please go ahead and add your questions in the chat box, and we'll note them for the very end during the Q&A session, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Please wait one moment while I let you know a little bit about today. I don't know if you heard, but actually our last webinar was Zoom bombed, unfortunately, but we have taken more security precautions. We have actually hired security for today, which is Nay and Cody here, taking this very seriously. They'll be keeping an eye out for any Zoom bombers or any people that are trying to get into this webinar that are not supposed to be in this webinar. Additionally, due to the cost of security, we also have put into this paid sponsorship. So just a quick interruption, and I'll pass it on to our sponsors.
All right. Thank you all for coming and for taking some time to hear me out. I want to welcome all you young and inspiring entrepreneurs. And I'm so happy to be leading you all through this course, Smart Money, Investing for You, Forget About the Rest. All right, I'm going to hop right into this. We got to know some key terms when we're investing. The first one, stocks. Stocks are the capital raised by a business or corporation through the issue and subscription of shares. So you, the investor, invest your money into corporate stocks. Think of this as leveling up your money. You are no longer just sitting on it, but you transformed it into stocks. Now you are a shareholder. Say it with me, shareholder. And as one of these, you get special privileges that most people don't when they just save their money. So that brings us to our second term, financial capital. Think funds. This is any economic resource such as cash, loans, or equity used by entrepreneurs and businesses to buy what they need to make their products or to provide their services. Next term, real capital. Think goods. This is just the assets that a company has. You know, combs for good business presence, machines for manufacturing, laptops for smart money investing webinars. And we'll get more into all of these terms in our real world example in a minute, but I want to talk to you now about my favorite term, dividends. Dividends are a sum of money paid regularly by a company to its shareholders, me, future you, out of its profits. So listen here. You invest your savings into stock. What you're really doing is investing in hope. Hope that one day the corporation will pay dividends or someone will someday want to buy the stock from you at a higher price than what you paid. That's called flipping. But when you buy a corporation's stock, that signals that one or more person, you, expects the corporation to be profitable and respectable. And respect is everything on Wall Street. Respect comes from us making profits. So, as a shareholder, the dividends are yours. This is why it's so important for you to invest your savings. Okay? Would you get dividends from just putting your money away into a rainy day account? No way. And if you aren't going to use it, you might as well make it work for you. This is what smart money is all about. Okay, on to our last term, the most important term, the stock market, the virtual world where investors like you and me buy and sell stocks. So now what makes the stock market interesting is that unlike an actual storefront where prices are usually what's advertised with the exception of a coupon or Memorial Day sale, the stock market works on trust. People, first and foremost, have to believe that a stock is performing well. And if a stock got people's trust, it's a good stock for you. So before we jump into our real world example, remember, stay positive. So now that we got the key terms out of the way, let's get into the why and how of investing. So, well, as we all know, the markets have been all over the place with this pesky pandemic. But our great American Congress has stepped up to the issue by passing the largest ever US financial stimulus packet. $2 trillion worth of a bailout, and the American taxpayer gets their cut of $1,200. So while you might be upset that you lost your job, do you see the opportunity before you? The stimulus coupled with the 2017 tax cuts, an investor's paradise. So come take your share of the profits with me. With as little as $500 a month, you can make some safe, reasonable investments into the stock market and start setting yourself up for long-term success. Okay, so while the naysayers may try to scare you off with talks of depression levels of unemployment, I say to you, employ yourself in the stock market. Sure, some people aren't going to survive this little downturn, but there's winners and losers in every game, and you all look like winners to me. So the bitter losers will yell, corporate greed and living wages, but they just miss the point entirely. These corporations we are about to invest in aren't full of greed, they're full of love. Love, dividends. These terms are interchangeable, okay? See, when a corporation has love for you, it shows you in dividends. And they sometimes go to extreme measures to show you this love. Ever heard of stock buybacks? These corporations simply use their profits to buy their own stock, reducing the amount of stock available and then raising its value for its shareholders. Future you, don't forget. And sure, some of these employees don't get their extravagant demands of raises, healthcare, job security, but we all do crazy things for love. And you know what? When you play this game as long as I have, you learn it never stops, thanks to taxpayer-funded stimulus packages. A lot of the stimulus money comes in the form of loans, and some of these loans have conditions that you got to keep most of your people employed and on the payroll until the loan runs out. And then the corporations don't even have to pay it back. Sometimes it's just straight up grant money. And then as a bonus, the Federal Reserve comes and buys out the stocks and bonds to keep the value up and make sure the markets don't collapse. So corporations can end up making money, making profit on all this free money from the government. It's a pretty good deal, everyone. So how? You're probably asking yourself, can I really make money this way? Well, let me tell you, the wealth of the nation billionaires has increased by $434 billion. That's 15% since the pandemic began. And you know what? They were investing. Your friends, unemployed and playing Animal Crossing. So now, get with the winners. The next question you probably have in your mind is, how do I get my dividends? Well, I have two corporations that I believe will have long-term dividends for you. First, we have to invest, and the best times to do so is when stocks are low. And as you can see here on the left, Boeing stock is at a nosedive, great for you and I, okay? So what makes stocks good for the long term? Stocks that do good for the world. And remember from earlier, stocks that people trust. And over here on the right, I'm showing you Raytheon. As you can see, nosedive. The time is now. And I'm really, really proud of these two stock options. They have a place in everyday lives, and they touch the lives of people all over the world. Boeing and Raytheon. So the mission of these two corporations, freedom and liberation, has not stopped. And now more than ever, we need to stand with them and invest. Invest for our freedoms, invest for our dividends. Now, I'm not saying this without dipping my toes a little into their inside operations. And I'm really excited to bring you along this journey with mine at Boeing. I was recently hired on as their senior sourcing manager, and I want to give you a better insight into why this stock is great. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my quick orientation video with the Boeing Corporation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Hey, Sport. Thank you for tuning into our little Zoomy online training here. Uh, as you know, with all the crazy things in the world right now, it's probably good we stay put until we get back out there, get building. So I understand you to be one of our new chief sourcers for the AH-64E Boeing helicopter build-out, so that's great. So we'll just get to the orientation here. So the first thing, let's get you ramped up on why we're here today. We want to learn how the Apache helicopter is born. So the Apache helicopter, what we got here is pretty much a tank with blades, fly through the air, bam, blast the bad guys, day or night, rain or shine, to hell, back where they belong. So these bad boys are put together by Boeing, and the little engines that make go whir, those are by General Electric, and those are the same boys keeping your cold cuts cold and your dishes automatically washed. So you're probably thinking to yourself, Apache helicopter, what's so special about that? Well, these are the select killing machines that our humble government is selling off to our friends like the Israeli Air Force and hopefully soon the armed forces of the Philippines. And has proved itself to be quite a heavy piece of machinery. We've won Baghdad with it, Libya with it, Iraq with it, all these places that you see on TV. That was the Apache helicopter, of course. And the big deal here is that the U.S. we're going to sell 6 Apache helicopters to the Philippines for something like $1.5 billion with all the fixings and everything. And so, what I'm hoping is that the Philippines is able to fight COVID-19 with these helicopters. Very important that they do that. So, as you know, your job is very important. A couple of things: keeping our investors happy, making sure that this project goes through. So, down to business. Why in the hell would a couple of helicopters be worth something like $1.6 billion? And thanks to you and your job of sourcing our materials, you can make that happen. So let's take a deep dive to understanding why the price tag is the price tag that the price tag is for the helicopter. So we start out with nothing, right? There's no helicopter, end of story. Just kidding. We need these to defend our democracy. So we start out with nothing. There's nothing at all. So how do we get something out of nothing? How do we get helicopter blades from thin air? Well, the answer to that is raw materials and supply chain, which is what you're going to be taking care of. So, for example, you want the pilot driving the thing to be bulletproof, right? Now, there's people on the ground with their rocks. We don't want them to get through to the person who's driving the Apache. So the Apache is heavily armored on all sides. And some areas of the helicopter are surrounded by Kevlar, which is a soft armor for extra protection. So we'll take Kevlar, for example. Kevlar, my friend, needs sulfuric acid to be made. Sulfur comes from the earth. And whose earth, do you ask? Well, anybody who's got that earth. And sometimes we can get sulfur, these things, really cheap from Indonesia, for example. We'll use Indonesia as an example. You just go into the communities, there's not a lot going on there, and you say, hey, cross your T's and dot your I's on this here contract. We'll open up this pit mine and all your boys can have jobs, and we'll just pay them real cheap. I mean, cheap for us, it's a lot for them, you know. We're talking like $5 American a day for going down into the mines and grabbing all of the sulfur and hauling it back up. And for them, $5 is a lot, but for us, you know, that's how we keep our overhead down to nothing. And in some of the ritzier places, you might give them $12 a day. But, you know, we'll just say for this example, we're looking at $5 to $12 a day. And so you think about that down the supply chain right there at the bottom. For the price of a day's work, that's only $5. And that's just to keep these people alive so they can come back to work the next day, another $5. And that keeps our overhead real low, and that keeps the investors very happy. The lower that we can, you know, produce these things like Kevlar, the happier our investors will be, because the dividends will come back and they'll reinvest, and that then we keep our jobs, right? So you want to make sure that you really pay attention to the entire supply line. You get these local people, sometimes they're like indigenous communities, they do all the heavy lifting, driving the truck that contains the sulfur in it. Maybe you give those boys $3 a day, and all they're doing is driving a car, and so you're looking just a few pennies here and there, and that's about where we start with the raw materials. And so that's just Kevlar. That's just coats some of the outside of the Apache helicopter. But there's other things on the Apache helicopter it's important too, like and you've probably were very excited about hearing about these, the Hellfire 2 missiles. They're just buckled right to the sides. And the helicopter's radar locates the target, and the missiles zero in on it. Boom! So Lockheed Martin, those are the guys who are making the Hellfire missiles, and they get big money from the U.S. government for these things. For example, a $548 million contract back in 2017 supplying 7,358 Hellfire 2 tactical missiles. And so just like the Kevlar, we start from zero. There's no missiles. There's no nothing. And something important on these missiles is there's a little computer in each one that communicates with the radar system, and they tell the missiles to blow up when the target's reached. And it's kind of amazing, right? A computer for each one that's designed and put together with all these materials just to blow up. And so you want to make the computer for the Hellfire missile, right? Well, you're going to need stuff for computers, right? Like gold, silver, platinum, copper, nickel, cobalt, aluminum, zinc, graphite, just to name a few. And so let's go back to the beginning, right? Just an example, let's zero in on graphite. China is the largest exporter producing graphite, 75 to 80% of the world's graphite. And there's numerous other countries like Canada, India, Brazil, the DPRK, North Korea. But the price of the raw graphite is about $550 per ton. And so, you're thinking about a missile that costs millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're getting this graphite for $550 a ton. It's a pretty good deal, but maybe you can help us get that little bit lower. But you got to be strategic about it. There's a lot of local villages that don't like the graphite mines, and they bitch about not being able to breathe, and it gets on the crops, and it's everywhere, and things like that. But you get close to the local officials and the towns, and hopefully we can get around these environmental complaints. Can you imagine having to clean up a town covered in graphite dust? Like the computers that you're watching this Zoom call in would cost millions of dollars. Maybe it'd be astronomical. Like if we had, on top of paying the miners like $5 a day, if we had to vacuum up every little piece of graphite that flew into the air, the prices would just be astronomical of these products, and the investors would be very pissed off. And so we want to make sure that we keep these things very close to us, and we make sure that we take care of the end result here. So the investors are expecting profit, and it's our job to make sure that they keep the cost of production down low enough that the investors keep coming back. So at the end of the day, the Apache helicopter does its good work. If the arms deal goes through with the Philippines, for example, and the armed forces of the Philippines can send those sweet, sweet Apache helicopters in, and all those lands belonging to the local population, boom, bam, boom, open up, and we'll be able to get into those hills that we've been looking at since the 70s and the 80s. A lot of nickel there, and of course you need nickel to make computers and all the things that like strap on to the helicopters. And so it's like this really cool cycle, right? It's like you make an Apache helicopter, you get a little bit more land, and you're able to make a new one. And this is like what our investors are looking for, this like cyclical kind of cycle here. So more nickel, cheap nickel, more raw materials, the farther investors' monies go, and more Apache helicopters, more sales, more money. But you make sure that you get down to that level, and make sure that we keep those prices low from the very beginning. So that our end product, when we're charging, $5 billion for a helicopter, that we are really getting our money's worth at the end. So, anyways, thanks for coming to this short orientation. We'll be definitely having more, and make sure that you report to your next orientation today. HR wants to talk to everybody about their salaries with all of this COVID-19 stuff and the shelter in place kind of thing. They have some cuts that they want to talk to us about, especially for the new employees. And don't really know what it's going to be, but it's happening to all of us, and at least we have our jobs. So thanks for tuning in, and if you have any questions, just you can email me, but I am really busy, so perhaps you can just Google it. Have a good one.
Hold up a minute. No, 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 no. Okay. Yeah, ignore all of that from those people. They're definitely trying to sell you something. So let's just say no. Dividends is love? No. Let's actually analyze that and really say, you know what? Let's break that down. Let's break that down to what the actual truth is. And I'm going to pass that over to Cody, and Cody's going to tell you what's really going on.
Got it. Thank you, Joseph. Man, I feel like this is always happening. You go on a YouTube, go for a YouTube video to try to find something that will actually help you organize, and then an ad pops up about, whether it's something from the newest iPhone to even the whole coronavirus videos telling you to support the great work the military is doing. It's like you can't actually get away from these corporate sponsorship propaganda videos. So sorry, everyone, that we had to do the same thing. We're going to definitely assess this as part of our Earth Data Tax Day team and see what we can do with that corporate sponsorship in the future. But anyways, with the little time I got left, let's try to actually break down what we saw here and try to figure out what was going on behind it. And if you got any questions about any of our sponsors' videos or any kind of rage you want to share, keep putting that in the chat, and we'll come back to that for the Q&A, and do the same for the rest of our presentation. All right, next slide, please, Joseph. So the supply chain, that's what this Boeing Apache helicopter training video was going through. And this is the kind of cycle that they want to show, the cyclical cycle, talking about shareholders, the sales and productive management team, suppliers, warehouse, going through the whole system. And it looks pretty harmless, right? In fact, it looks kind of cute. I really love these little icons here. But let's break down what each of these little arrows actually means. Next slide, Joseph. So first of all of that capital, all of that finance capital that our entrepreneurship training video went through, when we're talking about the military, and to use the term from our last webinar, the military fossil fuel industrial complex, what actually is that starting capital? It's our tax dollars. This here pie chart of the US discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is all spending from our tax dollars. So when you're thinking of that, of the harmful, think positive, investment training that we got earlier, remember, this actually is your money that the government is using to invest in this system. And we invest more money as a country in our military than the next 10 countries combined. So remember that when you're thinking of the don't ask questions type of investment that our government likes to play. Next question. Okay, so that first word, shareholders, what does this actually mean? Next animation. The shareholder in this case is literally the Department of Defense that initiates these sales and acts as the main shareholder to start this process. Next slide. A better word we can use is stakeholder. Any person with an interest or concern in something. In this case, we're talking about a business, right? So the shareholders, those who are holding investments, are a stakeholder. But the important thing to remember in this too is that we are also stakeholders. If that starting capital money is our tax dollars, that makes us stakeholders. And every single person who is involved in every step of the way that you saw in the training video going through the supply line of an Apache helicopter, most importantly, those communities are also stakeholders. So let's break this down through the lens of every stakeholder in this. Next slide. Research and development. The US government actually has its own R&D team, and it's called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is usually going to be the agency that is funding boatloads of money, literally investing in universities to get them to train students to become part of the research machine of the military fossil fuel industrial complex. So for DARPA, the dividends are more managers for Boeing, for Lockheed Martin, for Honeywell, for Energy Transfer Partners, all the companies that keep this machine going. Next slide. Logistics. There is another department of this, and it's literally called the Defense Logistics Agency that looks through every step of the process and makes sure that all the gears are oiled just right and that there's no tweaks needed in the machine to fund, so that the money, the materials, and the exploitation of labor flows through that perfect circle you saw at the beginning. This is not an accident and works this way. It is very much calculated by our own government departments. Next slide. So now let's break down that word procurement in 3 steps. So the first part being raw materials. These are all the materials that that training video was going through. And as you can see here, and as we clearly saw in the training video, the mining of raw materials is inherently destructive to the earth when it's done on this commodity basis to create these war machines for a market for war. But also, one more transition, this means that people involved in the process have to be exploited just enough to make it cheap. And this process of procurement, the companies that go into making this happen, are also areas for dividends. They're also areas that investment firms will invest in. They'll invest in construction companies, they'll invest in mining companies, in plantation companies for, say, palm oil that's even used for some of this. And like was said in the video, the only way to make that a profitable investment for strong dividends is to pay the workers, as little money as possible. Yeah, like the training video said, it means that in every step of the way, there is going to be workers who have to be exploited in order to make the most off of these dividends. So it's inherently destructive to humans as well. Some of the most critical resources that are needed for this: copper, lead, nickel, silver, beryllium. These are all used for fighter jets, for tanks, and the Apache helicopters. So it's these markets for raw materials that you are going to see investors put the most money in to try to get their dividends. This goes in for chemical engineering as well, in which workers are put in hellish conditions where these chemicals can cause lots of long-term medical conditions that will lead to death, even in the long term. And it's in these harsh working conditions where workers are paid almost no money that allow the dividends to be that strong. And of course, manufacturing as well is another point in the supply chain where factories in certain countries companies will put them into holding companies so that the corporation's name is not on there. And that's the way that these corporations hide. So investors don't even know. That whole don't ask questions and think positive language that you heard from our sponsor is hidden by this process of holding companies, where it's literally all off the books, and manufacturers manufacturers can exploit their workers without anyone knowing. And of course, what's another major part of this logistics is oil, energy, fossil fuels. This is why in our Earth Data Tax Day Coalition, we are calling this system the military fossil fuel industrial complex, because the military needs oil in order to keep its business of war running. And this is no accident. When Trump sent the military into Syria, not long ago, a few months ago, he specifically said, oh, it's to keep the oil. It's to defend the oil. So this is where we say, again, that the fossil fuel and military corporations are their own supply and demand. And who are the consumers in the end? It's all the branches of the military. And by consume, we mean actually use to consume entire nations, consume entire lands, consume entire communities of people. And that is what's needed in order to keep the US government and Wall Street, quote, thinking positive about their investments. So that capital, that finance capital, that favorite word of entrepreneurs trying to build up their money, it's all and every step of the way paid for by our tax dollars through all of the different levels of the government bureaucracy. And it hides itself in plain sight so that American taxpayers can just go on with their day and think positive. But where does that rate of investment show up the most? Well, in certain states, when it comes to military spending, it is a major part of the state's economy. But the question is where in the state? It's going to the top military corporations. These are the military corporations that are receiving that rate of investment. So it's not actually the state government the state as a whole, or else you would see many working people being able to benefit from this. But the lie is completely laid out when you see that it's the corporations who are raking in the profit, and it's not actually going to the people, the citizens who live in the state. The US is the largest arms exporter too. As was said in that training video, there's this new weapons deal that's coming up for a vote to go to the Philippines soon. And we'll say more about that at the end of this presentation. But if the arms are being exported, it's a clear sign that there's other interests in this and not just the US's. So that's just the key thing to remember in this, is that we're all stakeholders. And if we're all stakeholders, we have to understand what our role is in this. And who are some of the other stakeholders? It's not beneficial, clearly, when US debt is rising to unseen proportions like we haven't seen since 2008. Is it beneficial to state employees? Well, why is there such a high rate of unemployment as all these different state agencies are being cut? Is it beneficial to the soldiers who are driven to war because of the military fossil fuel industrial complex? The people who are serving in the military and driven to wars that are just causing more demand for products? It isn't when you're seeing the way that veterans are treated when they come back from war. And it's a shameful treatment that the US government goes through in order to pretend like this supply system is working for everyone. And of course, let's not forget the people who are at the receiving end of these of this complex. The word consumption, just consuming a product, takes on such different meaning when you're talking about a military machine whose consumption is waging war on people just to open more markets and exploit more and more people. So more shareholders and investors can just go in and think positive. It's not good for workers either. Every step of the way, this investments and dividends that investors get are based off of exploitation of workers, of nations, of the earth itself. And so in our organizing work, we have to understand that we're dealing with a system that uses these lies about how investments and dividends work to manufacture consent from society. We talked a bit about this at our last webinar, but it's through all of these corporate sponsorships, like the one unfortunately we had to take up, that give the justification for this to keep happening. So we didn't get talked into this. And what we can do is talk back. And that's what we want to invite all of you to do with us. So on one end, if we're fighting against investments, we have a weapon on our side, which is divestment. I myself am an organizer with Code Pink, And we have a campaign to divest from the war machine. And our Earth Day to Tax Day coalition here is really working on finding the ways to divest institutions locally here in Portland from the Boeing Corporation because of its role in keeping this complex alive. So we have to find these companies, we have to name them, we have to shame them, we have to oppose them and expose them for what they do. So that's one way that you can join us. And we hope that all of you join the Earth Day Tax Day Coalition and help us in this work of divesting from these companies that are making a killing on killing. We have another call to action coming up, and I'm gonna pass it off to Jesse from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines to talk about that one.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, so like we heard from Janelle and Cody, on April 30th, the U.S. Department of Defense announced 2 potential arms sales with the Philippines, totaling nearly $2 billion, and one of the primary contractors actually being Boeing. And one of the many weapons included in this sale are the Apache helicopters that we just studied the life cycle of with Janelle. And the response of the Philippine government to the COVID pandemic has been a purely military response. President Duterte has put the entire country on lockdown and has enacted a shoot-to-kill order, which the armed forces of the Philippines has swiftly acted on. The indiscriminate use of attack helicopters firing on rural villages has been documented by many human rights groups. And most of these attacks have actually been on indigenous villages and rural communities already plagued by land grabbing and displacement by massive corporate mining projects that put more money in the pockets of foreign investors and the most wealthy, influential people in the country, projects that don't really serve the Filipino people. And so while the people are being forced to stay in their homes under de facto martial law, like conditions during a global pandemic, the government is still paving the way for these operations to continue. And because of their resistance and basic demands for land and life, many environmental defenders have been either arrested or murdered. And just while the Filipino people are asking for food and mass testing and the right to their own lands, their government is responding to them with bullets. And so this is what these weapons and these arms sales will actually go towards, to continuing President Duterte's indiscriminate violence against his own people. These weapons deals are not in the interest of the Filipino people or the people of the United States either, right? They only serve the interests of the ruling class. And so we really have to understand the role that our government plays and ask the question, what kind of government prioritizes subsidizing weapons companies who are arming violent fascist regimes that are killing their own people instead of providing them relief during this time? And what are the things that we can demand our government actually use that money to do instead? During a global pandemic, why is our priority to not spend money producing more ventilators or providing free mass testing for people or creating a healthcare system to make health services more accessible to everyone? And so as people in the US, we have the ability to rise up and demand that our government not fund this violence. And so we want to invite you to take immediate action with us to stop these arms deals, which are not final until May 30th. And so our first call to action is for folks to sign on to this letter to Congress demanding that they stop these arms deals, which they have the ability to do before the sales become final on May 30th. And so you can find the link here. And in addition, we want to invite folks to join us for a call-in day on this Thursday, May 28th, where we will be calling both Senator Merkley and Representative Blumenauer's offices and asking that they take action to stop these arms deals. And if you registered for the webinar today, we'll send this information out to you so you can participate and also take all that anger and agitation you're feeling right now and mobilize other people alongside you. And so while in the immediate, we want to focus on stopping these arms deals, we also know that our fight isn't over after May 30th, right? While we're utilizing our legislators to make incremental changes, we must know that our real challenge is to deepen our links and unity among each other and to face our common enemy. And so we know the people united are always the ones who are the most decisive in making change by pulling out the system by its roots. And so again, we just want to invite you to join us in our local campaign to cut PSU's ties with Boeing as well.
Awesome, thank you, Jesse. And so just passing it back to Janet, who will facilitate this part with the Q&A. So Janet?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. And thanks for everybody for being on this call. Um, one quick thing to start, Amy asked that the link go into the chat. So Jesse, if you could do that, and then great idea, because then we can copy and paste it directly from there. A while early on, we had, sorry, I'm just looking to see who this is from, but there was an interesting remark about temporary credits. Rude banks are issuing temporary credits from Tiff G. And Tiff, I don't know if you want to drop anything in the chat following up on that. Pedro has a question. What can we imagine as a better investment for students who are at Portland State University who are being solicited by Boeing to do what's called an opportunity in internship with Boeing? Where else could they go to get training? And I'll just say on that point that the Boeing internship is specifically about supply chains, which we've heard a lot about in this call. Cody, would you like to speak to that issue of, obviously students are always needing to get skills and experience. And so I'm sure this Boeing internship looks pretty nice. What are some other things that PSU students could be doing?
Totally. And before I do, I actually wanted to give a huge shout out to both Pedro from Sunrise Beaverton and Janelle from Buy-in PDX. Let's be real, we had a lot of fun with this. And so we had to kind of go with our little program, our little Zoom theater. But really wanted to acknowledge Pedro and Janelle and their organizations for helping to put on such a great satirical presentation about, the lies, right? The lies that we're told. Because I think that that's such such a huge point, is about is that manufactured consent, right? Is that propaganda that's given. And so I think that the question about if we're calling to divest, where do we reinvest, is a good one. And it's important because it comes back of how do we counter that propaganda with that narrative, with our own narrative. So for one thing that I think of is that the Boeing internship at PSU from the School of Business, the School of Business had a new building built for it over the last few years. It was getting all this more money, but the ethnic studies program at PSU was getting cut. So to me, that's clearly a sign of where the university has its priorities. So I think that if we're calling to end an internship like that, well, first of all, I'd love to hear what other PSU students would think. But I do think that having a process that actually gets the voices of the students there is necessary. And I think that finding ways to invest in jobs that are going to lead to dignity for people, that are not going to involve sort of death at the end line of it for other people, is going to be the way to make that happen. So yeah, I'd love to pass it off to the other program folks to also answer that.
Yeah. Other folks who worked on this presentation want to speak to that point? And also, again, I invite anyone to drop in questions or comments into the chat. Okay, so Robert Torres says, do we have specific people at Portland State to contact about the internship?
Yeah, I think that's actually something that still needs to be looked into. We have been reaching out to student organizations, particularly like environmental justice student organizations. Um, um, but that's something that, yeah, we still need to find out what are the students' demands, because yeah, we can't really particularly say. Although it does make sense, let's have the funds going into other areas of the school rather. We still need to find out.
And so I'll just read these two questions out loud from Amy. Maybe the city could sponsor a program about creating and researching workers' co-ops and creating local supply chains for things we actually need locally. Would like to speak to that. Then we'll get to Kim's question.
Yeah, Amy, thank you for spelling that out. That's exactly what like I had on my mind when I thought about the question. This big globalized like supply chain that we, have for our survival, and how stuff gets on our stocked at our marketplaces is going to be disrupted as like climate change, does its thing on Mother Earth. So yeah, the localized economies are where we need to be moving forward, and that's what I wish. That's kind of what I wish these internship opportunities, and not even like it shouldn't just be relegated to students at universities, but like you said, a city could sponsor something and people in the communities could participate in an ideal world. And then, yeah, to Kima's question, that's also been on the top of my mind too. It's, with how easy it is to like invest in, especially now with like technology, there's apps that you spend $1.25 at the store, they'll round up to $2 and invest at 75 cents for you. And it seems like how Cody mentioned, it's everywhere and there's no alternative. And I would love to invest if it was for like a community like hydroponic garden that made sure everybody had leafy greens at the table, but there are not those alternatives yet. But yeah, if anybody else wants to talk about like how to talk to your friends about stocks and why they're mostly evil.
Well, I'll take a crack at the at that quickly, and then we can get on to Tiff G's question about the Boeing PSU partnership. I went through a version of this with my mother in terms of getting her to pull her money out of Wells Fargo. And I guess I would say that usually it's not a single conversation that leads to an immediate action. It's more like talking about values and our money in more general terms to some degree, and then talking about what the person values and how what they have their money invested in, or in my mother's case, just parked in bank accounts, is not supporting those values. And also where they might take that money and reinvest it. So it's a layered conversation. And Kim, I'm thinking ahead that this might be a really good subject for a Zoom conversation with a bunch of people. I mean, really, it's not just about the stocks. It's how do we use our resources, in this case, money, to support our values and to help create the world that we want, not just go along with the one that exists as is. And in my mother's case, she was a very conscientious person. So me valuing that, recognizing that in her and speaking to that, I think is one way, not to come across as somehow scolding or like, we have all the answers on this, but more like exploring what people want to do with their money. And generally, People do want to do good things with their money. They have no idea how bad some of these things are. And then from Tiff G, there's a clarifying question. Who's the coalition's target audience in regards to divesting from the Boeing PSU partnership?
So, I mean, one thing I think I'll just say on this right now is I think that our campaign, action campaigns as a coalition is also still in a lot of beginning phases. So I'm not sure. I think in the future, I'm hoping we can have more in-depth webinars as this campaign grows. I think these are all great questions, and we really want to actually y'all to join us in sort of growing a divestment campaign like this. One option, like I said at the beginning of my presentation, it's we're looking at all these different ways that that investments are happening throughout the city of Portland. The example of PSU is just one. There's so many out there that need to be found, and even the ones we know about, we need to learn more about. And that's something we can only do by bringing more people into this coalition. So I don't know if I have a lot of strong answers for this just yet, other than if we want to really find the answers together, let's jump on board and let's do it together. Let's do it with us. So yeah, not wanting to try to put a lot of not wanting to put a lot of energy into strong calls until we've got a really strong sort of pulse on how we can move forward.
Right, and I think going off of that, a big reason why we may not have a straight answer for that right now is because so much of our energy is going toward outreach, specifically to PSU student groups, to find out more how they would want us to go about that when asking about that specific partnership of internship as well. So just trying to gather more the students' perspective on that before we move forward with any really, really specific targets.
I had one thing come to mind related to Kim's questions about talking to family. It was after Janet mentioned Wells Fargo, and I remember in 2016 when news broke that the fake account scandal that was happening there, and it was targeted towards immigrants or people that weren't lower education, English wasn't their first language, and signed up for fake accounts, charging fees to raise their numbers internally. And that was a big push on my end with my family. My mother's mortgage is through Wells Fargo. My first bank was Wells Fargo. And yeah, there's obviously corporations can hide a lot of the evil through some of their language, but that you couldn't hide that was so explosive at the time. And just talking about it all the time was part of it, hoping that people would come around. And it's hard too when the news cycle recycles so quickly that that's a forgotten thing now. But yeah, if there could be more pressure on the more forward-facing evil things that corporations do, I think would be a good one to lean in, because it is hard to talk about imperialism, the supply chain, resource extraction, and try to use all these things to say and now go join your community banker. It almost feels like that the consequences of the evil and the alternative they don't ever meet. But yeah, I remember how disgusted I felt from Wells Fargo specifically on that situation, and using that to try to get people to move over to something else.
So Amy, yeah. So Amy's looking at, the engineering and science students who, of course, would be targeted for recruitment by Boeing. And also business students are recruited because of the supply chain issues, which, as you can imagine, at Boeing are huge. I think that, again, I'm going to direct this toward either Joseph or Cody about reaching out to those different groups of students at Portland State. And of course, unfortunately, we can't just go on campus and set up a table or hang out and meet people in person.
Oh, I
right
see.
now.
So in terms of if it's engineering students and whatnot, we're not, yeah, as it's been said, it's not very clear, but specifically the internship at PSU is specifically for the School of Business. We're not aware if there's any reaching out for engineers or science majors, particularly in the Portland area. Okay, if there's no other questions, yeah, let's go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. And we want to, yes, thank everybody for being here. As Nay posted in the chat, please go ahead and drop your email if you want to receive more information as well. And then in terms of our next webinar, it'll be on June 6th. At 1 p.m. the same time. And going back to our calls to action, if everyone on May 28th can go ahead and tell Senator Merkley and Blumenauer to stop the U.S. $2 billion sale of arms. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you either at our next coalition meeting, which is on Sunday at 3 p.m., or at our next webinar, which is on June 6th. All right, thank you everyone, and have a great day.